Just before we get into this video, I just want to say that there are parts in these interviews that are pretty graphic, and I'd just like to warn you just before you get too far into it. The two people that I want to look at tonight is Lynn Sells and Diane Downs. Both of them murderers. One a serial killer, the other murdered her own children. Well, attempted. We'll get into that in a minute. They're not aware in these interviews of how they sound, or the things that they're saying are so ludicrous, and that's the most frightening thing. Now, it's fair to say that to look at tonight is Lynn Sells did have a very bad, cruel, neglected upbringing, not only from getting into his teens, but well before. Even as a toddler, he was passed about. By the time he was 7 years old, he was drinking alcohol. Not long after this, he was also he was hanging out with a fella called Willis Clark, who was doing things to him that should not have been happening. And his mother did not really put a stop to this very much. I think it appears that she may have had an inkling about this, and we don't know what the reason for this was, why she didn't really put a stop to it. However, she didn't. But he was actually passed to an aunt, back from his aunt, back to his mother, then to his grandmother, back to his mother. Then his mother went off and left him. She took the other kids with her and left him because he was constantly getting in trouble. From the age of 7, he was drinking alcohol. So he was a handful. However, he was neglected and he was left. So by the time Tommy was 10, he was on narcotics. His mother had abandoned him well and truly by this time, took the other 4 children, and he was staying with his grandmother. He was also on the streets as well sometimes. He was just coming and going, and he started to live a nomadic lifestyle. You find this is pretty common with serial killers, actually. I mean, Lynn Sells, he went Missouri, Atlanta, New York, Arizona, Florida. He went all over. That was the same with Samuel Little, if you remember. He had a similar upbringing, and he lived a nomadic lifestyle. He travelled from state to state. So while Sells was incarcerated, he was interviewed. I must warn you that there's parts of this interview that are pretty graphic. If it does get demonetised and it disappears, this, I'm going to put it on my Patreon. But yeah, brace yourself.
Where I sat down with a 45-year-old man who could arguably have one of the baddest brains in America.
The first time I did a shot of dope, it was the best feeling I ever had in my life. And the first time I killed somebody, it was such a rush. And it was just like that shot of dope. Every time I did it, it was that rush again. And I started chasing that high.
Lynn Sells was once a little boy growing up in St. Louis, but around the age of 14, he says he became addicted to killing.
How many people have you killed?
Lord, I don't know. I don't know.
10?
Yeah.
20?
Probably.
30?
It's up there.
50?
But see, I'm not Billy the Kid making notches on my holster, so I know it's been a lot. I am hatred. When you look at me, you look at hate.
When I look at you, I look at hate?
When you look at me, you know what hate is. 'Cause I don't know what love is. 2 words I don't like to use is love and sorry, because I'm about hate. Vicious cycle.
I couldn't help but be grateful for the glass between us.
I don't have no feelings no more. No emotion, no. I like to watch the eyes fade, the pupil fade.
What do you like about that?
It's just like setting their soul free.
What are you thinking and feeling when you kill someone?
It's just like that drug. I'm after that drug again. I don't have a on and off switch. I'm just after that drug. I'm after that feeling.
I wonder if you could just tell me what happened as you were killing her. Did she give birth to a baby?
You know, you're pushing your luck.
I'm sorry.
Let's not get into blood and guts, because that's what you're trying to get into.
You also killed children.
Some get killed, yes.
Now, why would that happen?
I didn't want them to live through the pain I lived through.
The young girl named Crystal, she came to her fate by having a sleepover at her friend's, where Tommy Sells was staying. She was so brave, that little girl, and so smart. She actually pretended that she was dead when he did what he did to her. And with that, she actually ran in that state to her neighbours and wrote down, I'll put the letter up, actually wrote down what had happened. It was because of that little girl's bravery, Crystal's bravery, that Tommy Lynn Sells was incarcerated. Without her, he'd have carried on. But because she acted like she was dead, and then she ran and then wrote down everything, then that's how they got it.
After what I'd seen him do, he had no emotion in his eyes.
That emptiness evident as we spoke.
So what if I called you something that you didn't like? And you'd think about killing me?
Well, if we was in a fight and, get your head down in the concrete, then, so be it. But
What happens when my head goes down to the concrete?
well, what do you think happens? It cracks like a coconut.
And then what happens?
You die.
But for some of the families of his victims, ending that brain function was what was important. Sells was on death row for more than 13 years. The most recent delay? Over the exact makeup of the drug cocktail that would be used to kill him. Sells said the pain of the death penalty paled in comparison to his life.
I suffer more here than I'll ever suffer in that grave. I have to live with it every day now. When they kill me, at least I'll be free then.
Last night, Tommy Lynn Sells' final appeal was rejected. He was executed at 6:27 p.m.
When asked if he wanted to make a last statement, he just simply answered no.
For the family of Katie Harris, it was long overdue.
Now it's a day of closure and celebration that justice has been served.
So yeah, Sells did receive the death sentence. What I don't understand with this is that he did say that, you heard it in that interview, that he did say that, if that happened, then he'd be away from all this, and more or less he'd rest in peace, and he wouldn't have to wake up thinking about it every day. I don't think for 1 minute he woke up thinking about it every day, basically because 10 minutes before he was laughing about what he did and what he can do and what he's capable of, his capabilities in quite a lot of these crimes. Whether that was without going into too much detail, no matter who that was to, he was very clear on what he's capable of doing. So I don't believe for a minute that that was true, that he felt that at least he would be out of it and have to think about it every day. Because the other thing is, he'd also put in an appeal. So if that was the case, why put in an appeal? And he got the easy way out in a lot of respects, because he literally got an injection and went to sleep. More or less said that within a few minutes he was snoring, and 13 minutes later he was pronounced dead. So he got off lightly in comparison to what a lot of his victims went through. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. If I can just jump in here and just ask that Only 50% of people that watch the videos actually press the like button. If you could just change that for me and just hit that digital like button down there, take you 1 second, I really do appreciate it because it will help my channel out. Thank you. I'm going to let Diane Downs describe everything that she did with her children, her family, but it was basically for her to be with another man rather than a husband. So this was for love.
The blood that just kept gushing out of her mouth, and
she tried to wipe her whole family out because a fella that she was seeing didn't want a ready-made family.
Elizabeth Diane Downs says the family was on a sightseeing trip when a shaggy-haired stranger flagged her down and demanded her car. She refused, and the assailant shot Downs and her children at close range with a .22 caliber gun. 9-year-old Christy was shot first, through the hand into the chest as she tried to protect herself. 3-year-old Danny was shot in the back and is now paralyzed from the waist down. 7-year-old Cheryl was shot twice from behind and died on the way to the hospital. The gun was never found, and neither was the shaggy-haired stranger. Police started suspecting Downs as the culprit. The prosecution claims her obsessive love for an ex-boyfriend in Arizona was her motive. The state says Downs felt her children were getting in the way and preventing a romantic relationship with that former boyfriend.
I have been through that night so many times. I've even been through it with my psychologist. It's very hard, it's very tearful. There are a lot of memories that, I don't know. A lot of people, when something traumatic happens to them, they suppress it immediately. I kept those memories because I knew that I was the only person that was going to be able to tell them what happened when we got to the hospital. And when I got there, the first thing I said was, call the doctors. Second thing was the blood type. Third thing was, call the cops, because they've got to find him. And so I had to remember as much as I could remember.
The other thing that brought it to light that Diane was involved in this was because when she was going to the hospital to see her children, one of the little girls' readings on the monitors was going off the chart. They're experienced and they would see the opposite effect. When a child hears a parent, a mum or a father, everything settles down and they become more relaxed. But in this case, everything was going off the Richter scale for them, and that is what highlighted it even more. Obviously, her story didn't add up anyway, but they had to keep her away from them children. They knew that once that had started happening, they just knew that they couldn't let her near the kids.
When this man shot my daughter, my first reaction was to snap back to my childhood, to the pain that had happened to me back then, my marriage, my entrapment by society. This man was bigger than me. He was stronger than me. He had more power because he had a gun. He was in control and I was not. And there was nothing I could do. And I stood there and I looked at Christy reaching, and the blood that just kept gushing out of her mouth. What do? You just stand there trapped. And then the gun kept firing and firing and firing. And it was monotonous. It just kept going. It was like a slow motion picture. And then he swung around towards me, and this is something that I did not recall when I was explaining to the cops, because it wasn't like a movie when I was telling them. I was telling them what happened, the important details. He shot my kids. I pushed him. I ran. And when he swung around, he was pointing. When he swung around, it hit the tips of my fingers. The gun hit the tips of my fingers. And that snapped me. And I went, wait a minute. I'm not trapped by society. I don't care if he is bigger. If I stand here and I say, yeah, here, take the keys. I mean, there's nothing I can do. You win because you have the gun. My kids are going to die. And I'm not going to let my kids die. And so instead of giving him the keys, I feigned throwing the keys. Everybody says, you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It is still painful. I have a steel plate on my arm. I will for 1.5 years. The scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been shot the way they were, we all would have died, except maybe Danny. What do I see most is blood coming out of Christy's mouth, because that's what I see. I can't see Danny, and I can't see Cher. Sherry was laying on the floor, and driving to the hospital, I don't know the sounds that were made at the initial shooting because I was on the outside and all I could hear, I can't hear anything but gunshots. And I can see things, you know, that's it. Driving to the hospital, I can smell blood. I can not hear Cheryl. Cheryl's not making a sound. Danny is just crying real soft. So that sound stays in my mind, and the fact that Christy's choking, and then I'm yelling at her, I'm screaming at her to roll over on her face, because I was trying to keep her from choking on her blood, and it just didn't dawn on me that she was shot in the chest and that the blood was coming from her chest, not going down into her chest. To be honest, it made me a better person because I know all the mistakes. I know what not to do to my kids. I know what to avoid. One thing is to not be married. And that may seem very harsh, but I honestly don't believe that children need fathers. And they're nice to have around sometimes when they can do things to help you, but when they are mentally abusive, when they are harsh, and the way my ex-husband was, they're more a deterrent to the children than a help. And unless you can find a good father, there is no need for them.
Diane says her marriage with Steve Downs deteriorated when friction arose over an unexpected pregnancy.
Okay, after I had Christy and after I had Cheryl, Steve had a vasectomy. It didn't work. And he never went back to get checked to see if it worked. He just figured doctors know what they're doing, it must have worked. So after, I think it's, you're supposed to wait 10 weeks, be on some kind of contraceptive for 10 weeks, and then you're safe.
And then you check.
But you're supposed to check, yeah. He never went back because he was just too busy, and the doctor probably knew what he was doing. Well, I got pregnant, and I knew that I wasn't messing around with anybody, and that if I was pregnant, because I know what being pregnant feels like, I know how I got that way. And I told him about it, and he gave me heck. Oh, he was
is
just
Danny
furious.
or is Danny not?
That was the child that I aborted. Steve put me through hell with that one, and I had an abortion. Cheryl was colicky, Steve was bitching. I made Steve go back to the doctor or shut up. Don't accuse me until you know. The doctor said, yeah, you are fertile. I guess I goofed up. Come on in and we'll go ahead and do it again. Well, I was pregnant. So I was 20 years old, had 2 kids. Cheryl was colicky. My husband was a bastard. I'm sorry. And I had an abortion. And I felt so horrible about it that I had killed somebody like that. I didn't kill it myself, but I hired a doctor to do it. Yeah. And so I asked my husband to have his vasectomy changed, reversed. He refused. I asked him for a year. He kept saying no. I said, fine, I will find a suitable donor. I watched people I worked with. I picked somebody that was attractive, that was healthy, that was not abusive of drugs and alcohol and such. Was strong, you know, bone structure, the whole bit, a good specimen. It was really clinical. It was really terrible. And I seduced him. And I know my cycle, and it only took once, and I got pregnant. I went home, and about a week later, I told Steve I was pregnant. And he goes, how do you know? And I says, well, I know my cycle. I know I'm pregnant. And he was really upset. For that whole 9 months, he put me through hell. Every day, every night. It was terrible, just railed on me constantly, told me to get an abortion, the whole bit. And then after the baby was born, he told me, if you have a girl baby, I might let you stay around. But if you have a boy, I'm kicking you both out on your butts, and you're going to take those 2 with you also, because how do I know they're mine? That kind of attitude. Well, I lived with that for 9 months. When Danny was born, Steve, the reason it had to be a girl was because Christy was supposed to be a boy. I was so cruel and mean I had a girl, and Steve just couldn't stand it. Got one more chance, Diane. Cheryl better be a boy. Well, Cheryl turned out being a girl. He came into the recovery room. He goes, well, where is he? I said, he's a she. He says, how could you do that? You know, we're not having any more kids. Crazy, flipped out. So if I was going to have another one, I better darn sure have a girl. Well, when Danny was born, he was a boy, and my first thought was, I'm dead. He's dead. What's he going to do to that baby? And then I didn't care. I mean, that was my baby. That was supposedly the baby that was going to replace the one that I'd aborted. And as soon as I looked at Danny, I said, you can't. That's a boy baby. And I just knew that the baby I'd aborted was a girl. I'd named her Carrie and everything. There's just a different human being altogether, you know. And a whole lot of emotion on that delivery table. And Steve standing there right beside me looking at me like, you witch. How could you do this? You're out, you know. And Dr. George handed Daniel to Steve, and from that point on, Steve spent the rest of the past 4 years trying to prove to people that he was not biased and not prejudiced, thereby becoming biased and prejudiced.
Downs knew a lengthy murder trial would make her private life public territory. She's very frank about being a surrogate mother. She ran a surrogate program in Arizona and gave birth to another couple's child. Diane lost visitation rights to her own 2 surviving children after the murder. She was found guilty of contempt of court for seeing them at a secret visit set up by her ex-husband, Steve. Police found out about the visit in a letter Downs wrote to her former boyfriend, Robert Knickerbocker, known as Nick, in Arizona. You fought for Steve to get custody of the kids, and then you wrote a letter to your former boyfriend telling him that Steve was an unfit father for your children. A lot of people won't understand that, Diane.
But Steve is different than most people. Steve pointed an empty gun at my head at one time and pulled the trigger. Do you know why? He wanted me to marry him. That is crazy. CSD, I believe, is very careful in picking out the people that care for a child that they think has been abused. And right now, they believe that Christy has been one of the most abused children in the world. Granted, she was shot, but before that, she was never abused. But they believe that that's probably true. And so they're going to put Christy in a very, very good place. And so I know that Christy's in a good home. Yeah. And so I just decided that it was better that Christy be in a safe, in a mentally stable environment rather than to be with Steve. And I don't even cry in front of my family. And I can go to my room and I can write in this diary, this record book, some of my fears. And it's really even sketchy. I don't write in a lot of detail. There are days when I'm overwhelmed with emotion, and the book will be rather emotional, but very few days. It's just sitting in front of the book and writing down little sentences and then being able to cry over it and feel emotionally everything that I don't physically write down. And it's a very good release. It's therapy in a way. It's also a way of keeping a record, because in the beginning so many things were said to me that were denied later. It's so sad.
Have you ever thought of the fact that your writing these things could be used against you or in your favor at any future time?
No, I didn't, because I never thought the book would be made public. I got pregnant because I miss Christy, and I miss Danny, and I miss Cheryl so much. I'm never going to see Cheryl on earth again. And you can't replace children, but you can replace the effect that they give you. And they give me love, they give me satisfaction, they give me stability, they give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy, and that's gone. They took it from me. But children are so easy to conceive.
Obviously, everyone is curious who the father is, and I know you probably don't want to talk about that. Does the father know who he is?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I won't talk about it, because he feels as privately about this child as I do.
What would you do, given this current situation, if they said, if they took away your kids, mm-hmm. and then they went one step further and said, we think you're an unfit mother.
We're going to take away this one? I don't know how they're going to do it. I'd like to see them try to take this baby from me. And how? How could they do it? They're going to have to wait a long time to do it. Hopefully this thing will be cleared up by then. I don't know that they could do this, take it away after it's born. I don't know. I've never even talked to my attorney about it, because it seems so... Let's put it the way the DA says. It's laughable. I die every day. When I go to bed, I cry at night. Even now, I still cry. I dream about Cheryl. I dream about Cheryl reaching out with me with her arms and always giving me a kiss and saying, I love you, I miss you, where have you been? It's almost as if she really is coming back and saying, how come you're not here with me? One time, it was right after Christy went to the foster home, I dreamed that Cheryl came to me. Well, Christy came to me. And I said, Christy, how did you find me? And she said, Cheryl brought me. And Cheryl came walking out of the shadows. And there was blood on her shirt. And it was really spooky. And I said, Cheryl, I thought you were dead. And she goes, no, I was faking it. I knew they were going to take Christy away and she wouldn't be able to find you, so I brought you. And then Cheryl showed us how to sneak Danny out of the hospital and everything. It was a wonderful dream. It was wonderful, because we were the Four Musketeers, and we were together again. And
Downs also says the children were shot inside the car, but police reports claim high-velocity blood spatters were found on the outside of the car, on the passenger side.
The DA has come up with this idea that somebody was shot on the outside of the car, on the passenger side of the car. I was on the driver's side of the car when I was shot. And that's why it was so, it was planted. And it just seemed, I mean, it can't be real because they talk about blood spatter. And when they say spatter, I think something being shot out, like the blood spatter in the car. You know, it was so uniform, it was so regular, same-size droplets spread evenly in a pattern. And when they say spatter, that's what I thought of. And we saw pictures of this so-called spatter. It's drops. When they took the kids, they took Chris and Cher out of the driver's side of the car, and it's blood droplets. It's when they picked the kids up and carried them over the threshold, there is blood dripping down the side of the car. But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
Do you know, I actually remember the Dying Down story, and I remember thinking how weird it was because I just had my son around this time when this was happening. And I also remember that when Diane Downs was incarcerated, she did actually escape at one stage. I think it was at a barbed wire, 8-foot barbed wire wall, which I don't think is too out the question to get over. But she got over it, and yeah, she escaped. She was obviously captured again, and she was given an extra 5 years for that. Her story also, they made a film about her life story, but Farrah Fawcett. I'm just trying to think what it was called, and also a book which was documented. I'll try and find that. If I find it, I'll put it in the links below. So she's where she needs to be as well. Okay, all right then. So that's it for tonight. If you've enjoyed the channel tonight and you found it interesting, don't forget that like button. I do appreciate it if you would just hit that for me. And in between, I'm going to say take care, stay safe, and come back. Bye.